You're listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, brought to you by the Raven Creek Social Club, where we talk about faith and other oddities. For questions, comments, or to be part of the conversation, join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find us at Raven Creek SC. Now for your hosts, Emily Dixon and Nathan Underwood.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Doing another round of judges and still in the Song of Deborah. I think we're going to be in that through at least one more episode, probably two. So Emily said we're about halfway through her notes.
Right.
On after the second episode we've done on this. So we're moving right along, really. I mean, whenever you factor it all in, but there's just a lot of information here, and you don't realize, again, unless you're familiar with a lot of the rest of the Bible and how it all ties together, you can just read right past it and go, whoa, oh, well,
right.
That's a thing.
Well, and when you realize that this is one of the oldest parts of the Bible, and a lot of the theology later on was built on these older parts of the Bible. Mm-hmm. So it really does inform things that are written at a later date. But because we haven't studied this as a theological work, we tend to, like you said, we just blow right by it. Mm-hmm. Isn't this nice? There's a lovely woman singing a song, and we miss all the allusions that are in there, and the way that the rest of the Bible picks up on these themes and just illuminates them. Now, in last week, we were looking at verses 20 and 21. Mm-hmm. The stars fought from their courses, from their place in heaven they fought, I believe. Yeah, it's the stars from the heavens, the stars fought. From their courses, they fought against Sisera. And we were talking about that biblically, this idea of stars was linked to angels, or the Elohim, the lesser Elohim, not Yahweh. And so we kind of established that case. We looked at some, we didn't really look. I kind of listed off some verses that make that connection for us. Specifically in Job, where the stars of the morning sang in the heavens. At creation, we talked about how Satan was a star, and it talks about that in Isaiah. Mm-hmm. And then we talked about the fact that stars and angels are known to be part of spiritual warfare. They actually fight. And, in Joshua 5, when he sees the commander of the Lord's host, he's there with a sword. When Balaam is going down the road to curse Israel, an angel stands in the road with his sword drawn. Mm-hmm. So what Deborah is saying is very much in keeping with the culture. We even looked at some things from an Egyptian text that also says that stars are helpers in warfare. But it's not just the Egyptian text that does this. That we also find this in the Ugaritic, and we didn't get a chance to go here. So we're just going to dive right in, and we're going to keep building on that theme. So if you didn't listen last week and you want to know more, by all means, go back and listen to the previous episode. But the Ugaritic text, they specifically state that a Noth, and we know a Noth is another name for Asarte from previous episodes, that she had a heavenly retinue of starry helpers, is a lot of times how it's translated.
Okay.
And they controlled the weather. And so in this passage, not only do we have stars fighting, the very next verse is that mighty torrent of Kashan. So we have stars fighting using the weaponry of the angels.
Sure.
And Deborah's tying this all together, and God is the one ultimately fighting the battle, but just like with those choices in Deuteronomy, where humans get to decide whether or not they're going to choose to fight with God, the angels get the choice too. And the other thing I think is interesting is, go ahead.
I was like, before you go into that, I think it's interesting that the angels get the choice. Mm-hmm. And because we're taught so much in evangelical circles specifically that angels don't have a choice. They just are basically puppets. So I don't know if that's anything with where you're going, but I think that's kind of interesting.
Well, I didn't really prepare to go into it with this episode, but I think when we read Job and we start looking at the divine council, and we look at that passage with Ahab's death in Kings, where we get this background information, and even the rebellion of Satan, how can it be rebellion if he is not given a choice?
Right.
And so I think there is a level of choice and free will that the angels do have. Jude talks about angels that left their proper position. So how are they, I can't see where you can rule out choice for angels. I think that's a cultural thing that we have just held on to all these years. And it's been said often enough that instead of reading what the Bible says, we just accept the tradition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think we got to be very careful when we do that.
Well, I mean, that's basically what this whole show's about.
Right. And that's where you get into the oddities. And honestly, I think this is making, for me, when I look at the Bible this way, it becomes more alive. It becomes more dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And we begin to see how we get to participate in this reality that God has created. So in this particular passage, we have stars that are fighting. We have Kashan in this flash flood that wipes away Sisera's troops. We have this whole cultural background of angels fighting and angels using weather to fight the battles. But we also have the chariots.
Mm-hmm.
And at the parting of the Red Sea, when Pharaoh goes through the waters with his chariots, we have God using, once again, water. So I think there's something to that. And even in that Egyptian text I read last time, the chariots, the horses were missing after the stars fought against them.
Mm-hmm.
So all three of these concepts are kind of all bound up in not just Judaism, but in almost every ancient culture that's known at this point.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I do think it's kind of an interesting, because at the time the chariot was the most advanced weapon of war, really.
Right.
And so you have basically saying God's going to take care of the weapons of war. Like he's even going to destroy those.
Well, and, for us today, that's huge because when we think of the weaponry we have
mm-hmm.
and how terrifying, I mean, we aren't going to wipe out a village or two if somebody loses their temper. We're wiping out all of us, maybe.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think this is a good time for us to say, we can, if they could have faith at that point in time that God would fight on their behalf, we need to have faith. And this is why, I know people who, especially the generation before us, where we went through the Cuban Missile Crisis and all of that.
All the Cold War issues.
Yeah. And hiding under the desk in case a nuclear bomb went off, because that's going to help.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But that kind of anxiety, we don't have to have that. And we don't have to have it because we have a God who did all these things in the past and he's faithful to do them again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's what we can kind of pull out of it. And that's really what Deborah's doing with the song, because she did start out with that, talking about God coming down from Seir and from Edom and Sinai shaking. And so
mm-hmm.
she set up the whole thing. Think back of what God's doing. He's still doing the same thing today.
Right.
And so I think that's huge. Now, when we get into verse 23, we have this really, it's an odd verse, and it says, "Curse Meroz," says the angel of the Lord, "curse its inhabitants thoroughly, because they did not come to the help of the Lord, against the mighty." Again, that Gibborim. So we're still supernatural worldview. I think Deborah's using the words intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the only time in the Bible we have Meroz referred to. We don't know where they are, where it was located, who they were.
Okay.
We know it's a place because it has inhabitants.
Sure.
So probably a city or a village, probably not some planet out there in the solar system.
You don't think so?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about that conclusion. Although there are entire websites devoted to proving me wrong. So, I mean, this is...
And I'm sure they're well documented, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. No, they're not. But the view's not unprecedented. Actually, in rabbinic lit, the idea is that Meroz was Sisera's guiding star. That was the star that ruled Sisera's life.
Okay. Well, I was kind of wondering if there was any kind of indication that Meroz was a location in the spiritual world, but I guess that would be kind of the same thing.
Yeah, that's what the rabbis are arguing. And, we already talked about it once in this series that, the book of Judges itself is very deeply tied. Well, not deeply, but it is tied to the Jewish zodiac, and that each of the 12 judges can be associated with a different month.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have this, but then also with the connection to verse 20 with the stars being spoken about, this is what kind of leads to that idea. Like I said, I don't feel confident in saying that, but I do want to throw it out there that this is something that is discussed.
Yeah, well, and it's just interesting because the wording there is they did not come to help the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have been told, and I know this has to be true, is that God doesn't need help.
Right.
And so is this more or less they didn't do what God asked? They didn't carry out the plan that God had put before them? Something of that nature.
I think it's he extended the invitation,
mm-hmm.
and they didn't act on it. I mean, in a previous verse, Deborah says, "My heart goes out to," where is it?
The kings of Israel.
Yeah, the ones who responded willingly is what the verse says. Verse 1, the people offered themselves willingly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the idea of participating in the plan willingly, joyfully,
mm-hmm.
with faith, there's a reward for that.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that. I'm just kind of had a thought about that because, the coming willingly, the helping the Lord,
mm-hmm.
it really is kind of that idea of God giving us a task and we get the opportunity to be part of his design.
Right.
We get the opportunity to participate with God. Whereas in so many other, well, not so many others, but, generally a very specific sect of Christianity, we don't participate with God.
Right.
We just carry out orders because God said to.
Yes.
And I don't see that reveal. I don't see a God who just has us carry out orders just because we're supposed to, revealed in these passages specifically. And again, in a lot of prophetic passages as well. And then when you get into the idea that this is all leading towards God's plan where we get to be
mm-hmm.
rulers with him,
we're going to judge the earth,
judge angels. Yeah, as Paul says, things like that. It really leads me to believe that no, God does really want us to be part of the shaping of history, and
absolutely,
it just I that's what I get when I read the Bible.
mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well,
another way to read it.
I think I may have said this on the show before. It's that 3-year-old in the kitchen helping out.
Right.
We make a huge mess. We get in the way of our parents,
mm-hmm.
but the parents still love that moment when the guests finally sit down at the table and the 3-year-old's it's shake and bake and I helped. I mean,
right.
it's that idea. God doesn't need us. I mean, he obviously didn't need Boaz. He still won.
Mm-hmm.
But at
mm-hmm.
the same time, they had the option and opportunity to kind of step into that role. And I think that's kind of what's been extended to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And, is he cursing them for doing something they were unable to do? Or is he cursing them for doing something they were completely capable of doing and decided against? And
I tend to think it's the latter.
Right. And, and then you have to ask, well, why didn't they show up? And what was their reason? Why are they so important that the angel of the Lord here is addressing them? Because we
mm-hmm.
haven't seen him since chapter 2.
Right.
And that was when he told everybody, hey, you've messed up. I'm not going to be with you anymore. I'm not driving the people out before you. Because after this point, instead of, we started at chapter 1, the people themselves inquired of the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
From this point on, we're looking at prophets speaking on behalf of the Lord to the people.
Right.
So was Miraz disobedient because they just didn't want to? Were they being lazy? Did they not want to follow the guidance of a woman?
Right.
These are the things that I think the text prompts us to answer. I don't know to ask. I don't know the answer. But the big thing here is Deborah is directly quoting from the angel of the Lord.
Right.
And if you've listened to us in the past, you know that the angel of the Lord's embodied God of the Old Testament. So Deborah, as a woman, as a prophet, directly quoting, and she is confirming, this is why you need to listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because I had a few great ideas. And it's not because maybe I had some kind of wild insight. It's because I actually hear from God so precisely and so clearly, I can quote him verbatim.
Yeah.
And
no, that is pretty cool. There is a lot of questions in there. Because again, why even mention them? Because they don't show up anywhere else in the story.
They don't show up anywhere else in the Bible. I mean, we don't.
Pretty amazing.
We don't have any other ancient documents. We don't have any other text. This is it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they were basically wiped from memory, aside from the fact that they were cursed.
Right.
So whatever the curse was, it was final, it was complete, and it was wholly effective.
Very good and thorough.
Exactly. And this verse
very bad and thorough, I guess. Sorry.
Well, what's good and bad. We could, another whole tangent we won't go on today. But in providing this curse, this provides us with the chance for oppositional reading, because as we move into the next verse, we're invited to compare Meroz with Jael, because the next verse, blessed are you among women. Most blessed of women be Jael. It kind of depends on your translation there.
Right.
And Meroz, one of the things we do traditionally was believed to have been a village or a clan specifically within Israel. And so one of the ways that this thinking kind of came about was by compare and contrast. Well, if Meroz is cursed and Jael is blessed, and you have these opposites, Jael's a foreigner, the Meroz would have been a tribe of Israel, and Meroz had an obligation to fight.
Right.
Jael doesn't have an obligation to fight.
Yeah.
So the oppositional reading there is really where we get the most insight. It's not just reading this verse in isolation. And so when we're reading our Bible, no matter what we're reading, we need to look at it. Is there an oppositional reading that would help us kind of fill out some things? Now, I think we have to be careful because we can go, get too far afield.
Yeah.
But I think at this point in the passage, there's reason to make these arguments.
Yeah. No, that is quite interesting. I like that.
Yeah. Now, as we're moving into Jael, we're going to take a little journey, and it's it's a good journey, I promise.
Okay. I believe you.
So, as we move into verse 24, let me just read what it says, because I didn't write out the entire verse. It says, "Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, of tent-dwelling women most blessed." And this phrase, if it sounds familiar, it's because we hear it a lot around Christmas time.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's the only other place in the Bible. This blessed among women shows up here with Jael, and then it shows up again in Luke 1:42. And this is when Mary goes to see Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, she said, let me just read Luke 1:42. "And she, Elizabeth, exclaimed in a loud cry, 'Blessed are you among women.'" And she's talking about Mary. If you compare the Greek from the Septuagint, our Old Testament translation of the Bible, then we compare it with Luke, we have the exact same Greek words.
So are we to assume then that Luke borrowed the phrasing from the Septuagint?
Absolutely. I mean, there's almost no way around it for him to pull this out of thin air, unless, divine inspiration, of course.
Sure, yeah.
But aside from that, and I think Luke did know the Old Testament. I think we see enough allusions back to the Old Testament that Luke was writing with full knowledge of what he's saying. Now, in the song so far, Deborah is kind of the epitome of a good Israelite woman.
Yeah. Now, before we get too far into that, I'm not sure if you're about to touch on this, but blessed are women among, blessed of women in tents.
In tents,
Are you getting to that part?
We will definitely.
That line just, I don't know what about it, but something just stuck out to me about that line particular, like in tents of like, why not just blessed among women?
Okay.
Why specifically in tents?
Let's just skip to that part. Because we were going to get there, but we're going to...
we'll backtrack to the other stuff, right?
Yeah, we'll backtrack.
Okay.
Yeah. The tent-dwelling women. She's number one, when we talk about women in the tents, typically who we're referring to in Jewish literature are Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah.
Gotcha.
Think back to their stories.
So it's they're putting her kind of on par with the matriarchs.
Precisely. They're putting her on par with the matriarchs. They're actually putting her above the matriarchs in a little bit of a way.
Okay.
And there's two ways to take this. The Jewish commentators basically said she's blessed among the women who stayed in the tent. So, the other women that would have been in her town, maybe surrounding them. Mm-hmm. The other women stayed in their tents. They protected their modesty, where Jael took this risk, mm-hmm. and she mm-hmm. acted very immodestly. And so, but in doing so, she was protecting them. She was allowing the other women to stay modest.
Okay.
So there's that reading, but then there's also the idea that the women in tents were the matriarchs, because when we talk about their stories, almost all of their stories refer back to a tent. Isaac takes Rebecca back to Sarah's tent. Rachel and Leah talking to Laban in the tent. The idea that when Sarah heard from God that she was going to have Isaac, Sarah was in the tent. God was outside talking to Abraham. So the women in the tents tends to point us back to the matriarchs, and the idea that an outsider can help defend Israel, which we've already seen that with Othniel and Caleb and Shamgar. Yes. So that's really what Deborah is inviting the reader to do, is to say, hey, sometimes proper isn't always proper, and sometimes proper isn't appropriate, but sometimes an outsider doing something we don't expect, or somebody, even an insider doing something we don't expect, is going to be the right move. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and we're going to talk about why this was the right move here in a little bit. So, but what I was going to say with Deborah, in this song, she has been the good Israelite woman. She's fulfilled the role. She's excelled in being the epitome of what it is to be someone of faith in that covenantal community. Mm-hmm. And you would really expect her, or expect Luke actually, to connect Mary not to Jael, but to Deborah.
Sure.
And instead, he flips our expectations, and he equates Mary with this outsider who acts inappropriately, who's immodest. Mm-hmm. And when he does this, it means that now he's putting Deborah's words and Deborah's role on Elizabeth and her husband. And, the instructions for John the Baptist are very much in line with the instructions that Samson's parents get. The idea that Zechariah wanted a sign reminds us of Gideon, and Elizabeth is filled with the Holy Spirit, not Mary at this point.
Right. And now is this to kind of offset Moses' role as where you have Deborah marrying Moses, right?
Yeah, Deborah marrying. Yeah.
Yes. So then you have, at this point, you have Elizabeth marrying Moses, but then you have the deliverance, which is from Jael, being actually Mary. And this is to say the deliverer is not the person you would think.
Yeah, the deliverer, exactly. Just like with Deborah, the Sisera will be given into the hands of a woman. Mm-hmm. You expect it to be Deborah. It's not Deborah. It is Jael. Mm-hmm. And so, and in Luke, several of the characters kind of merge together, mm-hmm. and he makes kind of a conglomerate character. So we have all the judges, kind of their stories, different elements pulled together. And then Mary steps in, and she's Jael. She becomes the one who embodies everything Jael had embodied. Mm-hmm. And
then when you look at the adult ministries of John the Baptist and Jesus, you initially would think, because of the notoriety and outspokenness of John, that he was going to be the Messiah.
And people ask him that.
Yeah.
And are you him? And when you look at the time and what's going on here when Jesus is born politically, I mean, you have a temple system that's enmeshed with the Roman government.
Mm-hmm.
The Roman government is appointing high priest, which they had no business doing.
Mm-hmm.
The people, the Israelites, are letting them do this. I mean, we could argue Rome had a greater army, what have you. We're learning from Judges. Who cares?
Right.
God doesn't.
Right.
It got to the point where even the clothing of the priest that was worn on certain occasions, the Roman officials would keep them and then lend them back to the high priest during these holidays.
Yeah.
And then the high priest would turn them back in. Well, what are we told in Judges? Don't make covenants with foreign nations.
Right.
And this is the political system that Jesus is born into, that Israel was very much in a covenant with Rome.
Right.
Now, we don't call it that, but
they really were.
They were, yeah.
I mean, they were put there by force, but they still also, went along to not die.
Oh, yeah. And that's what the whole story of the Maccabees is about, which is very interesting when you consider that the word for hammer
mm-hmm.
is the same word for the name Maccabees.
Right.
So there's a tie in there. And if you haven't read Maccabees, again, that's part of the apocryphal literature that
mm-hmm.
the Protestants don't have in their Bible, but the Catholic Church has preserved it in theirs. You can find copies online. And that's where, if you've ever observed Hanukkah, it's based on the story, and it comes out of the story of the Maccabees.
Mm.
And so it gets super interesting as far as those tie-ins that we don't have time to really explore as fully as I might like. But sure. Nathan's thanking me for my restraint.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I mean, I would like to know some of that stuff, but I think if we were to try to spend, the rest of the year in this, because we could literally spend the rest of the year in this one song.
Absolutely.
Then, yeah, that would be a totally different show.
Yes. And we'll have to wait for Heiser to do Judges to see how long he spends. So, but we have to remember the primary motivation for writing Judges is to remind people, if you're going to act like you don't have a king, then you aren't going to have a king.
Right.
Because we do believe this was written at the end of the monarchy. But in the process of writing it, the story really becomes about the need for a king. Why is a king so essential for Judaism to flourish and prosper, and for God to carry out his vision for the world?
Mm-hmm.
So if John the Baptist and Elizabeth and her husband become the judges in this book, then John the Baptist is preparing for the king.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the book of Judges is about. It's preparation for the king.
Right.
And so, when you look at his message, John the Baptist says, the time is fulfilled. The kingdom of God is at hand. Repent and believe in the gospel. That's Mark 1:15. The king's coming.
Right.
Which is the story of Judges. The king's coming.
Right.
After me comes one who is mightier than I, the strap of his sandals I am not worthy to stoop down and untie. I have baptized you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. This is a spiritual truth proclaimed.
And with fire.
And yeah. Okay. Yeah, I cut off my notes. But this one, Holy Spirit. Yeah, but this is a spiritual truth proclaimed. This is what Deborah is doing in this passage. And so you have this wonderful parallel that's going on here, because Deborah's announcing, this is how salvation is going to be accomplished. And it's through the God warring for us. It's for him fighting on our behalf.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jael, through the virtue of being a woman, she had all the tools needed to accomplish Deborah's words. And so this is where it gets super exciting for me, because Jael's home and everything that was associated with being a woman in this time are the weapons. They become a weapon in her hand.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit when we were in the narrative, how the things that were supposed to bring life brought death, and the representation of the chaos element of the female goddess, how that was the fear that people lived under, and here God was using that fear that people lived under in order to actually deliver his people.
Exactly. And when you okay, so because it gets so good, because it literally becomes the body of a woman in Mary that becomes the means through which salvation enters the world. And so here Jael does it with the home, the symbols. Mary actually does it with her body.
Yeah.
And and if you're one of these gods, if you're one of these lesser Elohim who have disobeyed God, that God has said in Psalm 82, like any man, you're going to die. What is a woman? She's the means of your destruction.
Right.
And so, Jael saves a nation. Mary becomes the one who saves through her salvation for the entire world.
That Jesus comes and saves the entire world, not Mary herself.
Yeah, exactly.
But
she's the means.
She's the means to bring Christ into the world.
Now, the problem, if you carry out this analogy incorrectly, what you wind up with Sisera equaling Jesus somehow. And obviously that's incorrect. I don't think I have to spend a lot of time elaborating the problem with that, but we do have a really great solution to continue our analogy and go deeper. And it's in Colossians 2:13-15. And of course, this is Paul writing. And he says, "And you who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven all our trespasses, by canceling the record of the debt that stood against us with its legal demands." The legal demands here, that's the curse under Deuteronomy. When you disobey, you're cursed. So continuing, "Then he set aside, nailing it to the cross. And he disarmed the rulers, authorities, and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him." So he's saying our debt, our legal obligation, and what we deserve has been nailed to the cross.
Yep.
The people of Israel deserved Sisera. That was what they were entitled to. He'd been promised to them in Deuteronomy when you choose. You can be blessed or you can be cursed.
Yep.
And so Paul's saying right here,
it's the legal demands that were
put to death. Yeah, nailed to the cross. And what did Jael do? She nailed Sisera to the ground. I mean, it's just awesome. Now, when Paul's talking about rulers and authorities, he's almost always speaking in supernatural terms. And so Ephesians 6:12, "For we do not wrestle with flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against cosmic powers of this present darkness, against spiritual forces in heavenly places."
Yeah. What translation is that?
That's ESV.
ESV?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Judges 5:20, "From the heavens the stars fought in their courses. They fought against Sisera." So it's all coming back together in the New Testament. And when you begin to look at this theme, I mean, it blows me away, because when we start talking about cosmic battles in the Bible, we begin with Genesis 3, and we've got the fall with Eve eating the apple. We go to Genesis 6, the next big event. Women are at the center of that because the angels taking the wives. When we get to Exodus 2, Exodus 1, where Pharaoh is keeping the women alive, and it's the midwives who bring about saving the babies, which means Moses can live so that he can, again, women in the middle of it. Judges 4 or 5, all of the Gospels, we can talk about all of the women who were involved. We won't, but y'all guys get the idea. Revelation 12, where there was a sign in heaven. There's a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon is under her feet. There's 12 stars above her head. You start to, the language is all the same.
Right.
And there is something about women in these cosmic battles over and over again. We're in the center of them. We're either causing it, we're playing a role in it. It's
announcing it.
Yeah. And I don't think that's brought out enough. And I don't think I'm even engaging in feminist theology here. I think I'm just engaging in theology because that's what the Bible says. I'm not having to reach for any of this. So, now notice in verse 26, she, and it's talking about Jael, sent her hand to the tent peg, the right hand to the workman's mallet. She struck Sisera. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. Deborah's taking a great deal of delight in describing the violence here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she just gets gory with it. And, I think we have to remember that this is a violent culture.
Mm-hmm.
Blood, guts, fighting. It's not a huge, scary deal to these people because they live with it every day.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're, blah, da, 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 I don't care, but it's not as disturbing.
Yeah. It's not as far removed.
Well, even whenever, how many people today couldn't eat an animal they saw butchered in front of them?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's actually, I was kind of thinking something similar than that, but I didn't really want to pick too much on our non-farm friends.
Yeah. Well, it's a reality, guys. We aren't trying to be mean. So this is Deborah's celebration of what's going on, and you go back to that Colossians being put to open shame, triumphing over his enemies. So this kind of exaltation in God's power, it's part of the biblical language.
Yeah,
and so now we're getting ready to go into a part that we have to do a listener warning. Mm. Because there's just no way to discuss this next verse without getting...
Listener discretion is advised.
Mature and adult themes. And really, it's kind of funny because it's not really mature and adult themes. It's reading this as if you were a 14-year-old boy.
So sexual themes is what you're saying.
Yeah, because, with 14-year-old boys, everything's sexual. But
you got 3 seconds to find the off button. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so we're going to go with verse 27, and I'm just going to read the verse as it's written. That way you can know I'm not making anything up here. It says, between her feet he sank, he fell, he lay still. Between her feet he sank, he fell. Where he sank, there he fell, dead. So obviously, if you just read this very literally, okay, she killed him. This is what you get. And that is honestly the most innocent reading we can have of this passage.
About murder.
And so, yeah. Because everything else, it starts to get crazy. So the second way we can read this is with euphemisms. And euphemisms.
Which the Bible's full of.
Absolutely. And I've got some examples. So when we read it with euphemisms, that's just a nice way to say something naughty.
Right.
And there's... Just
go ahead.
Well,
you're trying to...
No, I'm not trying to... Because I started to go someplace, so I need to catch this in my notes. There is... even with the euphemistic reading, there's 2 ways to do that. One is that Jael seduced Sisera with the intent to kill him. The second one is that he raped Jael, and then she decided to kill him. So we're going to talk first about euphemisms and how they're used in the Bible, and then we'll let you decide as a listener whether you agree. And then we're going to talk about whether the seduction or the rape is the best reading.
Okay.
So
didn't expect to go quite all through there, but in this episode, but let's just tackle it.
Yeah. So reading this passage in particular euphemistically, we can definitely find documents of it to about 180 AD CE. And it kind of fell out of favor for a really long time. But the feminist theologians are picking it back up again, and they're bringing it back to the forefront of the discussion.
Yeah.
So the basis for reading a biblical verse, any biblical verse euphemistically, is that, number one, the Bible doesn't have a word for sex.
Right.
Number two, it doesn't have a word for rape. Number three, it doesn't have a word for the external genitalia.
Right.
So anytime you reference these things, you have to use euphemisms. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we all know the first one. Adam knew his wife.
Right.
It's sex. The other one, we find it in Sodom and Gomorrah, very familiar. Bring out the men that we may know them. Mm-hmm. Again, Amnon lay with Tamar. That was when Amnon raped Tamar.
Right.
go into my servant. This is what Sarah tells Abraham. Go into, again, we're talking about sex. And when you read those in context, I don't think anybody can miss that. And now we have to ask, is this a correct reading of this particular passage? The first word, sank, it's kara. It means to bow down or to crouch or kneel.
Okay.
We have it again in Job 31:10, and I'm going to read the verse here. Then let my wife grind for another. Then let others bow down on her, for that would be a heinous crime.
Okay.
I think it's hard to miss that it's being used sexually right there.
Yeah.
Now, this is the problem. This is the only time that word's being used sexually in the Bible. So one time out of 34 times. The rest of the time, it's dealing with worship. It's dealing with just other physical activities. It's not referring to sex. So that word in and of itself is kind of weak. If you're going to read it as a sexual interpretation here in Judges. The next word, nafal, we have one time that it can kind of have a sexual connotation. And that time would be Esther 7:8. And this is when Haman falls on her.
Okay.
And the story, Haman falls on her, and there's it's more like he just tripped.
Yeah.
But then when the king sees what's going on, he says, are you trying to rape my wife? Is basically what he asked. Right. And he uses a different word. He doesn't use nafal. So that one's really, really weak.
Okay.
Now, lay, I didn't even go into how many times in the Bible this is used in a sexual sense because
it's really prevalent.
It's all over. You can look that one up on your own. But the rabbis saw all of these as being sexual, and there's 7 times we have sank, lay, and fall. And Rabbi Yochanan says this means that Jael had sex with Sisera 7 times. Now, unless he's 14.
So that's a busy afternoon.
Yeah, and no wonder he was passed out enough to have a tent peg nailed through his head. But, I'm calling bull on that one. I think that's reading way too much into the scripture. But the other reason to read this euphemistically, and I think this is actually a much stronger case, is the phrase between her feet.
Right.
We have it 2 times. And feet, that's a very common euphemism for external genitalia.
Right.
Deuteronomy 28:57 says, it's talking about the afterbirth that comes out from between her feet. Mm-hmm. Afterbirth doesn't come from between your feet. Isaiah 7:20, God is going to shave the hair from the feet of the Assyrian king. Now, he doesn't have hobbit feet. You just have to
assume.
Yeah, you just gonna have to think lower half of the body and what can you shave? Ezekiel 16:25, and it's always got to go back to Ezekiel 16:25 when we're talking euphemisms, or Ezekiel 16. The English reads offering yourself.
Yeah.
The Hebrew literally says spread wide your feet.
Right.
And it's in reference to Israel whoring with
other nations,
with Egypt specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have good reason to read this as a sexual encounter because we do have that between your feet. That's pretty spot on. It's pretty acknowledged within most academic Hebrew circles that this is a euphemism, and we can't get away from the between your feet being a euphemism.
Sure.
The second reason we have to think of this as a sexual encounter is we have Sisera's fear. And that goes back to chapter 4. Is, if anyone asks, is there a man in here? Mm-hmm. Why is he worried about a man? And why not is he doesn't seem to be worried about them looking for him specifically, but just a man.
Right.
And so he's thinking of doing activities involving a man and a woman within a tent. The third thing we have to look at starts in verse 30, and that's when we start looking at Sisera's mother.
Okay.
And so I just want to read through this because
that is
Yeah.
That's a weird passage too.
Right. And we're going to talk about some of this.
I feel like I use that phrase way too much during this series, but it is really weird.
It is, but it's because it's so far out of our cultural context. And there's actually a lot of critique about this part. So I'm going to start in verse 28, and I'm just going to read through because everything else kind of hinges on this passage. It says, "Out of the windows she peered. The mother of Sisera wailed through the lattice. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the hoofbeats of his chariots? Her wisest princesses answered, indeed, she answers herself. Have they not found and divided the spoil? A womb or two for every man. Spoil of dyed material for Sisera. Spoil of dyed materials embroidered. 2 pieces of dyed work embroidered for the neck as a spoil." So
I think okay. So this passage, I remember like when I listened to Judges at the warehouse, I remember thinking, man, that's so weird. Like the consolation is like, oh no, they're just out raping and pillaging.
Yeah.
Like that's the consolation is, oh, they're just, they won the battle. They're out doing it. Yeah.
Exactly. So
that to me is just the foreign,
precisely.
idea.
Yeah. And so that when Sisera's mother, this is what, like you said, this is what she's consoling herself, that her son's a rapist, so everything's okay. I mean,
Yeah.
It's
So strange.
I think this is one of the things that we look at in support of it being a sexual encounter. Now, reasons against reading it as a sexual encounter is euphemisms are not absolute.
Right.
And, they require that shared language, which we don't always have.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's difficult to say that we share this language with Deborah. The second reason people use is, well, he'd be too tired and he would be worn out and wouldn't be able to perform. Now, we have documentation that when people are confronted, this is a normal phenomenon, when people are confronted with death, either the possibility of their own or the death of people around them, they often turn to sex as some kind of, celebration of life, to console themselves.
You might say it's like an evolutionary imperative to propagate the species.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so this escalated sex drive after violence, it's pretty normal. We see it in movies all the time. It's in TV shows everywhere. So I still think Sisera, human, and to have a human reaction wouldn't be that abnormal.
Right.
Now, sexual violence in warfare at this time was also
common. Yeah.
Yeah. Now then we come into the question of, is it seduction or is it rape? Now it's argued, and I saw this argued several places, that even if it wasn't a violent rape where Jael seemed to participate with Sisera, that there was an element of fear that she had, that it was his position of authority and power, that she consented like Bathsheba would have consented with David.
Okay, yeah.
The problem I have with that, and I've got to be real careful here because I don't want to sound like I would ever be victim blaming or anything like that. She went out to meet him.
Right. She called him in.
Yeah. Turn aside to me. She really initiates the contact between them. So it doesn't sound to me like she's afraid.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see fear in her actions. And why did she invite him in? Was she initially his ally, and then he did attack her and she turned it around on him? Or did she invite him in with the intent to kill him?
Right.
So the question really becomes, who's the victim?
Sure.
Is it Sisera or is it Jael? And I think some of it really comes back to, I think that the idea of killing a sexual predator is just more palatable.
Yes.
So, because the Jewish commentators present their story, it is as seduction. When they talk about it, that's how they present it. That she caused him to have sex with her so that he would go to sleep. and that she did go out to meet him. And when she feeds him from that lordly bowl, and she sets milk in front of him instead of water, and that this is very much in keeping with the idea of a woman playing on a man's weaknesses and playing to his ego, and in order to gain his trust.
Right.
And it seemed just a little too well planned out for them, for it not to have been a trap. And so their debate with Jael is, did she do something sinful in order to accomplish a holy act?
Right.
And we talked a little bit about that last week, one of the previous episodes, the running together.
Yeah, it was a few weeks ago.
Right.
But yeah, we have touched on that.
So, and you got to remember too that in the Talmud, kind of the presupposition is, if a man and a woman are alone together, then they're having sex. That's just basically throughout the Talmud. There's not really any nuance to that.
Okay.
So, but the like I said, the feminist theologians have picked this up, and they aren't. They're presenting it more as a rape because it is more palatable to modern audiences. Killing as an act of revenge for sexual violence, it's just not as heinous as other killings. And okay, well.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't seem to be anyway.
Well, here's some evidence from our culture.
Okay.
They're called rape revenge films. It's a whole genre. These include films like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Gothica, I Spit on Your Grave, Kill Bill, The Last House on the Left, Sin City, and even T.D. Jakes' movie Woman, Thou Art Loosed.
Okay.
So we have a whole, part of Hollywood dedicated to telling these types of stories.
Yeah.
And
fair enough.
Well, and there's even, I think, Hard Candy's another one. I mean, I was thinking about these and just going, there's list after list after list of movies that have this theme. And we do know that he is a rapist. Did he have this reputation before?
Right.
Which, we know that Jael knew who he was from the past. So who's to say what happened before this moment? Maybe this was just her chance to get back. And
then you get into the consolation of the mother that, oh, well, he's just out doing what he does.
Yeah. Oh, my cute little boy. It's so messed up. And the women of his camp, they are celebrating this. This tells you what kind of enemy that Israel was really fighting against.
Yeah, and the women are just okay with it.
Yeah.
It's just so weird.
Right?
This is, like I said, when I was going through, it's like, oh my, what am I listening to?
Well, and I think, a lot of times when people want to critique the Bible, the first thing they want to point out is, oh my goodness, they went in and they wiped out all these Canaanites. Look at the attitude of the Canaanites. Look at what the women are celebrating.
Right.
There's a problem here.
Yeah. There's definite problem with this culture.
This is not something that I think, if you lived in a city like this, you're either going to fight back or you're going to move.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that simple. And so the other thing Deborah points out is that Mama's at home looking out a window behind a lattice.
Okay.
She's secure. She's safe.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is with Jael, she's with the women in the tents.
Right.
And so she's drawing this contrast, the safety and security of the women of Israel. It's not about fortified cities. It's not about windows with bars across them to keep out the enemy.
Right.
It really is found in God. And so Deborah, the mother of Israel, is talking about the mother of Sisera. And she's been out there on the battlefield. She's been out there in the midst of the fighting while Sisera's mom stays at home. Who sounds more liberated here?
Right.
I mean, it's not the Jewish women.
It's not the Canaanite women, you mean?
Right.
They don't sound more liberated than the Jewish women?
No, they don't. They sound like they're stuck at home wondering what's going to happen next.
Right.
So, when the women rejoice, and the Israelite women rejoice, I kind of wonder Are they rejoicing because they know that Sisera is never going to attack one of them again? Because we already know they can't travel the roads.
Mm-hmm.
We already know that there's this fear of the Canaanite army that's throughout the land.
Yeah.
I think anybody, I'm going to use a cliche. I know you're going to hate me for it. But, when you look at Braveheart and the lords, the English lords coming into the villages and people just having to accept it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It would have been that same sort of scenario in this time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's astounding to me that we talk about how unsafe women are today. And, there's all these self-defense courses and walking to your car and having your keys ready and being able to wear what we want to wear and these great discussions. We have it so good. When you compare it to these ancient cultures, mm-hmm. our concerns are so minor because when we talk about sexual harassment today, if a man says, "Hey, you need to smile more," that's totally different than what these women were facing.
Right.
And I know that that's really hard for a lot of women. Oh, I shouldn't have to tolerate that. Maybe not. And I'm not saying that it's okay, but at the same time, it's nothing compared to what these women were dealing with.
Right.
And this whole song is really focusing us on the women and their roles that they play within their own community. And look at what Sisera is gathering up. He's gathering a womb or two. He's mm-hmm. gathering dyed materials and dyed work of embroidery. Notice what's not mentioned.
Money?
No gold, no silver, mm-hmm. no weaponry, no livestock.
Right.
It's all things that women have made.
Right.
And in doing that, he's really gathering up the women and everything that belongs to the world of women. And we're right back to the idea that this is flowing around women being the central element within these cosmic conflicts. Now, we're going to continue to go a little bit deeper here. But before we do, I just want to point out this section here over Sisera's mother. There's been a lot of debate around it. A lot of commentators don't like it. They don't think that a true prophet of God is going to be that violent, that a true prophet is not going to gloat over the demise of their enemy.
Have they read the other prophets?
Exactly.
Have they read the Psalms? What? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
you have to ignore so much of the Bible to get to that conclusion.
Exactly. Exactly. Sorry. No, you're right. But I think this comes back to we aren't looking at her as a prophet. We're looking at her as a woman. Mm-hmm. And we don't like the idea that women can be violent. I have 2 kids. Yeah.
I've got 2 kids.
You had 3 sisters.
I had 3 sisters. Yeah. And that's all I'm going to say.
Every set of stitches you ever had, I think, were my fault.
Yeah, I think they were accidents, though, mostly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, definitely. 100% accidents. So, but you step between a mother and her child, and we can get violent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. And she's listed as a mother
yes.
in Israel. And I saw this meme the other day. It was like, Mother Bear is my favorite. Mother Bear is probably the cutest way to describe that you'll kill someone if they mess with your kid.
Yeah, with no remorse and no mercy. Mm-hmm. And I think any woman who's had children feels that way. And so it doesn't make sense to me that people would say that this is a latter edition, that this is something that we need to look on with suspicion. Mm-hmm. It's in the Bible. It's been in the Bible a very, very long time.
It's been in there longer than most of the Bible.
Right.
It's more Bible than Bible. I mean, sorry.
Well, if you're looking at the foundation of theology, again, this is what this is operating as. It becomes mind blowing. So I actually got through all of this a lot faster than I
Oh,
anticipated.
no worries.
But this fits with the themes presented in prior to this in the song. And so I just wanted to hit a few points to kind of pull it all back together for us.
Yeah.
Because we're looking at a violent culture, and and that's been demonstrated through all of Judges. I mean, we open up with the thumbs and toes being cut off of the king, and it's going to get more violent, and it's going to get more gruesome, and it's going to be more pointed against women as we progress forward.
Well, and I do think it's worth pointing out too. I know we pointed it out in that episode where we covered Judges 1, but I think it's worth pointing out again that the violence of the cutting off toes, that didn't originate with Israel.
Right.
That, again, you're talking about, a place that celebrates rapists and cuts off thumbs and toes.
Yes.
So, yeah, like you said, look at the society that they're going after.
Right. And the society that's infecting them, that God has said, hey, this is a problem. And I don't want this to be what pollutes you. I want to keep you pure. Sorry, not poor. That's a whole other debate.
Yeah.
And so we need to remember that this society, it's beyond anything that we could imagine actually living in. We'll watch it on TV, but we weren't going to live there ourselves.
Right.
So Deborah's a judge. Judges are governing rulers. They're warriors. They are a part of this conflict, and they do what's necessary to stop the oppressors. We just got done with Ehud. Ehud, look at what he did. And so she's still keeping very much in that tradition. So, and this is an account of a cosmic battle because it's a prophetic word looking at the spiritual truth that lies behind the physical reality. And this cosmic battle goes back to Genesis 6, where women were the prize of the fallen angels, the stars, the host of heaven. And so once again, we have that tie-in. As a Canaanite or a Hurrian, Sisera he's tied in as one of the direct descendants of the Nephilim, of the Rephaim.
Well, and actually, that's kind of an interesting point. Because you said that the women were the prize of the fallen angels. I mean, think of what an incredible compliment that is to women. The daughters of man were so attractive.
They were to
the sons of God,
right?
That they were willing to give up their places in heaven.
And according to Enoch,
what a crazy
yeah.
I mean, this is what the Bible thinks of women.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't put it together.
That great.
Hadn't put it together quite like that because, in the book of Enoch, it has, I believe it's Azazel in that passage, the name that the main angel is being identified as.
Azazel?
Who...
it's not Azazel. I think it's different. Go ahead.
Okay.
It may be. But
okay, but the head angel, whoever he is, whichever one he is, he calls out all the other angels together and they make this pact. And they realize what they're doing. They realize what they're giving up. And so this was not like an uninformed decision, according to Enoch.
Right.
Now, how far we go with Enoch, that's a whole matter of debate.
Sure.
But this is important because it tells us that the people of that time period when that book was written, this is how they viewed women. So that's pretty telling. And so, and Sisera's, he's linked to that tradition because as one of the descendants of the Rephaim, he contained that bloodline from the children of the union between women of earth and the angels of heaven. And he seems to be more than happy to keep up the family tradition, which was violence and raping. And so he's very much an archetype of the Nephilim.
Sure.
And I think we need to remember that the first time the Nephilim infested the earth, God flooded everything to clean house. And so if God's going to use the waters of the flood to cleanse the whole earth of them in Genesis 6,
right?
And then here they've returned in Judges, and God once again uses Kashan, water, to cleanse the armies. But this time, what I love is the reversal here, because where the women were taken in Genesis 6, the woman takes Sisera.
Right.
And so we have, again, that full reversal. And then the women of Canaan, they worshipped Anath and Asarte. They worshipped this bloody goddess who was the goddess of love and the goddess who liked to decorate herself with body parts. And if you're a woman who's worshiping this goddess, there's something really wrong with you.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
let's just, yes, life and death are hand in hand, but the problem with this goddess is she was so unpredictable and so uncontrollable. She didn't even know when to stop killing her own people.
Right.
And so there's stories of her just going on rampages, killing everyone. And so to have a woman who can come up against a man who had been raised in this culture where that goddess was the top goddess, killed by a woman. We talked about that in the episode on 4. This is a huge reversal there. It's not what he expected.
Yeah.
So now, the representatives of the Lesser Elohim, I kind of touched on this, their representatives would be their offspring. Genesis 6 and Pharaoh and his armies, and Exodus 14 and 15, and the Canaanites here, we all had that supernatural intervention of water. And so I think we can see how all of these tie together, because we've talked about it before, how Pharaoh was the representative of this god.
Of the Egyptian god. Yeah.
So this really is, it's a song of women by a woman, about women, for women. Everything points us back to women. And it is because we've been at the center of this cosmic war. And, Eve was tempted in Genesis 3 to see and take. In Genesis 6, women were seen and taken. Pharaoh keeps the girls alive. And
then here you have Sisera, who was seen and then taken in.
Yeah. Well, and the other really fun little point with this, again, this is going to be terribly graphic. Sisera, who's celebrated for penetrating women with his phallus, gets penetrated by a phallic object.
Right.
And so it actually becomes a reverse rape.
Sure.
And it's, the destroyer of homes is destroyed by a home. And he becomes the victim of a representative of all his victims. And so the fact that Jael uses the tools of a woman to destroy a man keeps this very much about a woman who is still a woman and continues to hold on to her femininity in the midst of this chaos.
Right.
But not only do we have all these themes tying together, I think I actually had a page out of line there, because when I get through Genesis and we look at Exodus and we come back to Judges and we see women at the center of this cosmic battle, it's not just Old Testament. I want to read Revelation 12 here. And so we're in Revelation 12, it's verse 1, and it says, "And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant, crying out in the birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in the heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. And his tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who will rule all nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled to the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God in which she will be nourished for 1,260 days. And then verse 7, now there arose a war in the heavens, and Michael and his angels are fighting there. So from Genesis literally to Revelation, we can't get away from this theme as women being in the center. And the reason is, if you destroy the women, then now the promises of Genesis 3 can't happen.
Right.
There's no possibility of them being fulfilled. And because in Genesis 3, God says, and he's speaking to the serpent here, I shall put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So notice the words there. Number 1, between your offspring, this means the enemy of God has offspring. So now we're talking about the Nephilim. We're talking about the nations that gave birth to Sisera. And so he's going to be fighting against the offspring of God. Who's the offspring of God? The children of Israel. And so we have this ongoing plot that's going on. He shall bruise your head. What does Jael do? I mean, that's and she really becomes enacted prophecy. She herself lives it out, and she's reminding us God hasn't lost the plot. He still knows what's going on, and she's reminding us to look ahead. And this is all despite the fact that everything is going wrong in Israel. Everything is falling apart within Israel. And when you have a nation under oppression in the Bible, the ones who are actually going to suffer the most are the women.
Right.
Yeah. And so, and if you don't believe me, in case you think I'm building too loose of a case, we're going to go to Psalm 68. And we're going to buzz through part of this because I say buzz through. How long we got?
Oh, we're way over, but I saw you were close to the end of your notes, so I figured we could just wrap it up on a little extra long episode.
Yeah, we'll just buzz through. Okay. In that case, I'm not going to worry about my time.
Psalm what?
Psalm 68. And it says, I'm looking at verse 7 through 10. And it says, "O God, when you went out before your people, when you marched through the wilderness, the earth quaked, the heavens poured down rain, before the God, the one of Sinai, before the God of Israel, rain in abundance, you shed abroad and restored your inheritance as it languished. Your flock found a dwelling in it. In your goodness, O God, you provided for the needy." So we have, and remember the opening of that song in Judges 1, that when God came down from Edom and Seir and the earth quaked and the heavens dropped. So we have the same language here. Verses 11 and 12. The Lord gives the word. The women who announce the news are a great host. The kings of the armies, they flee, they flee. The women at home divide the spoil, though the men lie among the sheepfolds. The women are dividing the spoil. God's saying whenever he wins, it's not Sisera dividing the spoils. It's the women dividing the spoils. Verse 21, "But God will strike the heads of his enemies, the hairy crown of him who walks in guilty ways." Right there.
Back to the
crushing the head. What did Jael do? Verse 21.
And it's the hairy head of the enemies.
Okay, yeah.
So that also echoes back to Deborah's song.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right. So verse 27, you got a list of the tribes, very much so, very much in keeping with Deborah, as we were talked about before. But verse 15 and 18 is really what ties us back into that cosmic war. "O mountain of God, mountain of Bashan, O many-peaked mountain of Bashan, why do you look with hatred, O many-peaked mountain, at the mount that God desired for his abode? Yes, where the Lord will dwell forever. The chariots of God are twice 10,000, thousands upon thousands. The Lord is among them. Sinai is now in the sanctuary. You ascend on high, leading a host of captives in your train, receiving gifts among men, even among the rebellious, that the Lord God may dwell there." Now, right there, we've opened up a can of worms, because Bashan, this is the region where Mount Hermon is. This is the home of King Og, the Nephilim king, the one who had the giant bed.
Yep.
This is where Jesus, the same region where Jesus faces off with Legion and casts the demons into the pigs.
Yep.
This is the place of Sisera Philippi, the gates of hell, where Peter makes the confession.
Caesarea Philippi?
Yeah.
Not Sisera.
Oh, sorry. See, I've been saying it too long. So this all ties in together, and this all comes together as a, and like I said, it's unified.
Yeah.
It's being played throughout the scripture. And in the psalm, which is basically a rewrite of a Deborah song, if you go back and actually put the two together, and I refused to get too in depth with it because I knew we just hang out here forever.
Yeah.
But there are point by points. Habakkuk 3, same thing. The women become the centerpiece, and that's, I don't think we talk about that as much as we need to. There's one final thing, and we're going to wrap it up. The final way that Mary is tied to Jael is they're both tied to sexual scandal.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't matter whether it actually happened with Jael, that she was raped, she seduced him. It doesn't matter.
It's still scandalous.
It's still scandalous. And both of them are still having their integrity and virtue questioned to this day. But God celebrates them. And so I think the takeaway...
But God celebrates them, and there's no doubt that they are heroes in the story.
Precisely. And that what they endured, they endured for a reason and a purpose, and God did not forget them. And I think our big takeaway as women is that we're at the center of God's plan.
Mm-hmm.
We always have been. We're not forgotten. And we're not without defense. And we're not defenseless.
Right.
And, and our strength as women and our femininity, they're prized. They're valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think so often in Christian circles, we're taught that they're dangerous, which it is. Our being a woman is a dangerous thing, and not just to ourselves. We can pose a danger to others.
I'm not going to comment on that.
But, and sometimes that's a good thing. But that's the thing. Whenever we look at how God values us and how he celebrates us, then I don't know, there's hope for that. I think especially coming from those backgrounds where women are just basically everything we're told about women is that we're evil. Mm-hmm. We're the reason the world's in the situation we're in. And there was Jezebel and all these other horrible women in the Bible, but there's some really great women who stand in some really key points. And to know that Jael, probably the most violent and bloody of all women, she becomes the destroyer of Sisera, which is fabulous. And I know we're over time, but the point of attacking the women, and I want to kind of make this very clear, the point of attacking the women was to stop the promise of Genesis 3 from happening.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so when I say those Canaanite people and the Canaanite gods were afraid of a woman being able to rise up and destroy,
mm-hmm.
this is why.
Okay.
Because
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because if a woman can defend herself, then they can thwart God's plan. And if a woman can be dangerous, they can thwart God's plan. And so the fact that a woman was able to rise up with God's help shows that God he's going to succeed. Mm-hmm. And he did, and he does. So anyway, that's kind of what I got for this time.
So that's all. That's the whole
it.
Song of Deborah.
That's it. I thought we had more, but
well, I think we covered it pretty in depth, and it's very enjoyable. This was a long episode, so thanks everyone for bearing with us. I noticed how close you were to the end of your notes. I was like, we're just going to ride this out to the end, and we're only about 20 minutes over, so that's not bad. That's actually kind of on the medium side for a podcast anyway. But everyone, hey, I hope you enjoyed it. That was crazy.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to process a lot of this information and think about that and just kind of incorporate a lot of these thoughts about just the universe and God and his greatness and his goodness. I mean, and when I say incorporate that, and
it's
again,
that new layer. It's that new level.
Yeah. Well, and like, we talk again, and I've mentioned this before. Sometimes we just study this stuff to expand our view of God, and for no other reason than to make our worship more intense, or more complete, and bring our lives into going, we have a God who's worth living a life of worship for.
Right.
So,
and I think this demonstrates it, because we literally went from Genesis to Revelation with the study.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's in one chapter. And we didn't even hit all of the points. So,
oh, no.
So yeah, I'm excited. I think this is good stuff, and I hope that you guys are tracking with us, enjoying it out there. Anything we started on and missed, hit us up in the conversation. If you like what you heard, please rate and review us on iTunes.
Absolutely.
That goes a long way to helping us out.
YouTube reviews too, please.
YouTube reviews, things like that definitely helps. And if you want to be part of the conversation, hit us up on Raven Creek SC on all social media. RavenCreekSC.com gets you to pretty much everything else we've got going on. And if you really like what you heard and want to pass us a couple bucks to keep the hosting fees and things paid up, patreon.com/RavenCreekSC. You can find us on there. Anything you feel inspired to do to help is greatly appreciated. So
absolutely.
Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, a Raven Creek Social Club production. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you like what you've heard, please write us a review on iTunes or consider supporting us on patreon.com/RavenCreekSC. As always, thank you for listening, and don't forget to join us next week.